Hello, my name is James McCool. I'm the owner of PaydirtDFS.com. Today we're going to be doing a little breakdown and tutorial of the NFL models. I'm really excited for this NFL season. I think that this suite of tools that we have over at Paydirt this year is the best that we've ever had. If you've been a subscriber over the last year for baseball and for NBA, you're going to notice a lot of these tools that have been repurposed and retooled for NFL. And I just think that these tools are going to give us a lot of edge. I think that the way that models get built up inherently is unique and already gives a lot of perspective on the slate that you're not going to find elsewhere. So I think the way that we have developed things now is going to be really, really good for this NFL season. I'm stoked. So let's go ahead and jump into it. When you get to the site, you're going to see sports models, sports, NFL, and then these tools are broken down in kind of a way that I view as most useful to subscribers and then least useful. And when I say least useful, I just mean like it'll probably have the least traffic on the site. So we'll start with the range of outcomes, and then we're going to move into the contest simulations, which is new this year. Obviously a hot topic in the industry right now. But I think that the way that I built it up is unique and not a way that other companies are looking at it. And then we have the Pivot Finder, which came over from NBA. We have the Stack Finder, which came over from MLB. A simple optimizer, a Showdown range of outcomes and optimizer, and then the game and prop betting models. So let's move into the first one here. We're going to take a look at the range of outcomes. So the range of outcomes is your bread and butter model that you're going to be using the most here at Paydirt. It gives you a full breakdown of the slate for both stacks and players. You can see a lot of different tabs here. We're going to go through each one. The stacks range of outcomes is looking to give you a higher view look at the way that you should be stacking and the stacks you should be interested in for the week. What this does is it breaks each team down into the top 3 most important stacks, which is going to be a combination of wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, and the tight end. So what we're going to see here is, for example, for Arizona, you're going to see a mix of Marquise Brown, Rondale Moore, and Trey McBride, and then the range of outcomes for each of those 3 different combinatorial combinations. And then we're going to look at a whole bunch of different things here, right? So we have median, we have the floor and the ceiling of the stack. We have the how often it's the top finishing stack overall, how often it's the top 5 finishing stack, top 10 finishing stack, how often it has 60 or more fantasy points in the simulations, as well as how often it 2x, 3x, or 4x is the salary that it costs to stack those players. We're also going to have ownership and LevX. LevX is a rule of thumb leverage metric. Basically, if you have a negative LevX stack, you're going to want to have some positive LevX players. But that's roster construction stuff. Y'all can always ask me about that in the Discord. So some other things about this specific view. You're going to be able to choose what slate you're playing. So we have the main slate. We have the secondary slate here, which is going to be the afternoon. And then we have Thursday through Monday. One note on Thursday through Monday is that ownership typically won't populate for Thursday or Monday night games because of reasons. I'll continue to try to work on that in the season, but typically we're not going to see ownership. So it's going to give you some wacky LevX numbers. You can also choose DraftKings or FanDuel or create a custom table. The custom table will be based on cash, small field, or large field GPP. When we move over into the actual player range of outcomes, here's where we're going to get the player level stuff. So this one is deciding on stacks, and this is what you should be looking at first. And then here's the overall range of outcomes. So this is looking at players overall. So this is a range of outcomes of the entire slate ran against itself. So all players inclusive based on the data that you're looking at. Again, same with the team range of outcomes. You can look at different slates here, different sites. You can create a custom table. You can choose if you want to view just the whole slate or just specific games, and you can also break this down based on position. So this one is going to give you a lot of the same stuff that you found in the team range of outcomes. We're going to be looking at how often a player is the top finishing player overall, what their ceiling, floor is, top 5, top 10 finishes, how often they eclipse 20 fantasy points in the simulations, and then also some more salary-based thresholds here as well. So if you wanted to use this to find what player you should be paying up for, you can stack it by top 5 finish, and you can look and say, okay, so I should probably be paying up for Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, or Tyreek Hill, maybe Austin Eckler. If you want to see who the best value plays are, you can sort by 4x percentage. So there's Marvin Mims, Sam Howell, Luke Musgrave, and obviously these guys, like, ownership is not solidified yet, projections are not solidified yet, but these guys make a lot of sense overall as the best values on the slate. But this is an overall view, so this is all the players viewed against each other. Marvin Mims is only the top finisher overall 0.12% of the time because he has to go up against Justin Jefferson and those guys. What if we just wanted to see wide receivers against each other? Well, you can do that. So here's the wide receiver range of outcomes. Again, same options here. But this is just all of the wide receivers ran against each other. So instead of, like, Marvin Mims having to compete with Sam Howell and Luke Musgrave and Hayden Hurst, over here we can see what these players are just at their position. So now you can see that his top finish goes up a little bit. Marquise Brown goes up a little bit. We can see that the LevX is changed a little bit because it's just the LevX of these players specifically and this position specifically. So if you were using just this to build, you would start here. You would say, okay, I want to go with a Minnesota stack because it's relatively cheaper and has good projections, right? So start with this Minnesota stack. And then when you wanted to fill it out, you can come over here, go into the wide receiver range of outcomes, say, oh, Marvin Mims is a really, really good value, so I'm going to plug him in. Let's go over to the running back range of outcomes and look and see, okay, yeah, Joe Mixon looks like a really good play. I can pair him with Austin Eckler maybe if I have enough value. And then jump into the tight end range of outcomes and then pick your tight end. And that would be how you'd use this specific tool to build out a lineup. Now, the range of outcomes gives a really unique view on the way that you should be building, mostly because it allows you to look at the different thresholds. It allows you to say that instead of just seeing a median, like if we bring it up and see, let's look at running backs, right? So a lot of these running backs have like very, very similar medians, but some of them have better ceilings, right? So between Joe Mixon and Bijan Robinson, their median is only separated by, 0.19 fantasy points, but their ceiling is separated by almost 2 full fantasy points. Top finish is better for Joe Mixon. If you're just looking specifically at $8,000, you can see the difference between Bijan Robinson and Derrick Henry. Bijan Robinson is 2 times as often the top scoring running back overall than Derrick Henry is. You can get a lot of really good information on things like that. You can see, if you want to sort this by salary, you can see in the salary ranges like how often and how large this discrepancy is between Austin Eckler and Nick Chubb. For $200, he's basically 4 times more likely to be the top finishing running back overall. So these are really important things to consider when you're looking at a range of outcomes. And instead of using just medians to build, you can use finishing positions and GPP thresholds and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and move on to the next tool here. Hopefully my voice sticks through this whole thing. Now, we're going to look at the contest simulations, but I want to give a disclaimer here. I did a video breakdown on this. It's on my YouTube on contest simulations overall. And what I want to say about most of the contest simulations, I'll keep it short because it was a 20-minute video for the contest sims over on that other video. But contest simulations should be used to give you an understanding of what the field is doing with specific players and what you should be doing with specific players. I don't think, maybe SaberSim's contest simulations are at a point where you can actually utilize the lineups that are being created from the contest sim, but I think that for the most part, outside of that, like, you should really be using it for direction. And I'll show you what that means. So I'll talk about well, actually, let's talk about how to use this first. So in the uploads, you can upload a projection file and a portfolio file here. And what it'll do is you can then use these to insert into the contest sim. The projections file, I wonder if I have an easy projections file here. Let's see. Oops. I do. Cool. Okay. So we'll use this. And this is just using Paydirt projections, but we'll get the point across. There you go. So when you upload projections here and then a portfolio here, you're going to be able to come down here and see kind of a top-down view of what that looks like. So you'll be able to see your exposures in your portfolio, and then you'll be able to also see the portfolio itself, right? So this is default sorted by projection and ownership, right? So this looks pretty nice. And then what you can do is then insert that into the contest sim. I'm not going to do that for the purposes of this one because I want to talk more about what the contest sim is doing. But if you were to insert it in and then simulate out the contest, what you would see is this lineup number. You would be able to see in the winning frame how often these lineups end up winning in the contest sim. And I'll show you how that is here in a second. So in the contest sim, we're going to just load the main slate. Again, you can choose main slate, secondary slate, and this will be Thursday through Monday as soon as I'm done addressing that this morning. You can choose DraftKings or FanDuel. If you're not uploading a portfolio, or if you are uploading a portfolio, note there's an adjustment to the projections and deviation mapping to prevent projection bias. And I'll talk about that here in a second. Are you uploading a portfolio? I'm going to say no, but you can choose yes. What size contest are you simulating? You can do small, medium, and large. How many times simulating it? You can simulate this up to 5,000 times. And then how sharp is the field in the contest? Not very, average, and very. And then how in-depth should the seed frame be? Shallow, medium, and extensive. So let's talk about each one of these. When we're looking at contest sizing, so some people have asked me about what the contest sizes I recommend using for different things are. If it's under about 2,000 entries for NFL, that's relatively small. Medium is the vast majority of contests that you're going to be entering. And then large is basically like the Millie Maker or the slant, right? Those are both really, really big. And the $3 and the $1, like these 50,000 plus entry contests, or even 25,000 plus. In baseball, what we're looking at is anything basically over about 5,000 entries is large field. So for NFL, just 10x that, or 5x that. 25,000 plus is large field. But again, this is kind of a heuristic thing. Like, if you know that you're in a contest that is considered a small field contest, just choose small. Rule of thumb doesn't quite do what you want it to do. How many times simulating it? The more simulations that you have on something, the more accurate and consistent it is going to be. But if you simulate it only 1,000 times, then that's fine too. How sharp is the field? So not very. I would really only use not very on something like the Millie Maker or the $3. Just because those contests just have so many dead lineups. Kershaw, please shut the fuck up. You can use average for the vast majority, and then you can use very sharp for things like the Wildcat or anything above that. As soon as you hit the 333 mark in NFL, I think that's what you consider sharp. And then finally for the seed frame, if you do shallow, this is the fastest and still works very well. If you want to cover a lot more combinations, then you can use extensive. Medium is fine too, but most of the time I'm running shallow or extensive. So if we just run this based on these things, we say simulate contest, what you should see is this little thing pop up and then also see this little guy running up in the top right. And then what's going to happen is in about 30 seconds or so, it's going to pop out a frame of all of the contests that won the contest that it created, as well as what players were used, what their exposures were, and what their projected ownership is. So here are all the winning lineups. And you can see when you expand it out, there's this user field. If you inserted your lineups in, the lineup number that won, like the number of the lineup in your portfolio, would show up here. So if it was the number one lineup in your portfolio, this would be 1. If it was number 17, it would be number 17. But you can get a look, and you can sort these by a couple different things. You can sort it by projection, so what the projection was of the lineup that ended up winning the contest based on your projections. You can see what the score was that it won with. So this lineup had a projection of 111, but it won the GPP with a score of 151.91. And then you can sort by GPP projection. which is just a combination of the projection and the fantasy, the projection and what it won with. So you can see some things about the lineups that end up winning. And remember, so if you sim this 1,000 times, you're going to see that there are 1,000 lineups here. And then when we come down here, you can see the exposures that were used. Overall, you can see overall QB exposures, running back exposures, wide receiver exposures, tight end, and defense. So what this is showing you is the projected ownership is the projected ownership of the player. The exposure is how often they showed up in the winning lineups for the contest that you created. And then the edge is the difference between those numbers. So if you sort this by projected ownership, you can see Jamal Williams, Kenneth Walker. They weren't used very often, so they end up looking like really bad plays if you are considering playing a small field contest with an average sharpness, okay? So Jamal Williams and Kenneth Walker look like really bad plays, the worst plays on the slate overall in small field contests with average sharpness. The best plays overall are going to be guys like Calvin Ridley, Justin Herbert, Rashad White, Keenan Allen, those kind of guys, right? So this is your direction. This is kind of the thing that matters the most. If you have been in the Discord while I've been running the contest sims for MLB, you will see that what this ends up meaning is if a player, so we'll pull this up again here, if we have large edge on a player, right, that means that they're largely undervalued by the field based on this contest simulation. If they have low edge, it means they are largely overvalued. So that means two things here, right? If you are hand building, you're hand building 1 to 5 lineups, then what we want to do here is we want to focus on having some exposure to players that are undervalued. I personally think that you should build a popular lineup first and then try to look for leverage in small field. If you're building for large field, you could just build a lineup based almost entirely around all of the players that give you the most edge. There's nothing wrong with that. For small field, I think you should build a less volatile lineup first and then find a couple spots to give yourself edge. But that's roster construction talk. We can talk about that at another time. If you're an MME player, right, you could use this exposure limit here as your exposure cap for these players. So if you were looking at, say, Jamal Williams, you could set their exposure cap to 5% in your portfolio run. And that would be how I would do it for MME. I would just use these exposures as the hard cap for the players. And I would really only do it for the highest projected players too, right? Like, if you're building out a portfolio and you see that these guys project for this much ownership and you limit them to 5% in your run, like, that's probably fine for a lot of contests. So use the exposure and use the edge as a way to look at how you should be developing your exposure limits for players in MME. That is personally how I am going to be using the contest sim. There's going to be a lot of people that think that what they should do is just run the contest sims and then come up here, expand out this, and say, oh, what's the highest GPP projection lineup that I can use here? Oh, it's this one right here. I'm just going to plug that in. And look me in the face. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Every lineup that this produces is going to be viable for the contest that you ran it for. But there's a lot more to learn and glean from this if you are using things like the exposures, projected ownerships, and the edge, so you can get an idea of where you're finding your leverage. Remember, you should be thinking about lineups and how they can win, not how well they project. It's a really important concept. So that's how you are going to end up using the contest sim. Let's move on to the next ones. The next ones are much easier to go through, so it's not going to be quite as long-winded as that one was. But that one is really important to talk through. So this is the pivot finder. Again, you can upload your own projections here if you'd like. You can go into the pivot finder and you can say, are you using Paydirt projections or user? The user would just be whatever you uploaded. So the pivot finder is really cool. What you can do with this is, say that you wanted to look at comparisons to find pivots off of certain players. Specifically, let's go ahead and take a look at, Bijan Robinson. So we're going to set his acceptable salary range for pivots at $300 and the acceptable plus minus of the median range at 3. And then we're just going to simulate appropriate pivots. And what that's going to do is then give us a data frame that is ran on range of outcomes logic that shows you all of the players that are within $300 of Bijan Robinson and how they stack up against each other. Within $300 of Bijan Robinson and within 3 points of median of Bijan Robinson, right? So from this, this is sorted based on top finish percentage. And we can see that if we were considering, and this is for flex, I guess, super flex because Justin Fields is in there. But what we can see is how all of these players stack up against each other. You can see that all of their medians are very similar. You can see that all of their salaries are very similar. So if you were trying to choose between these guys, how would you do it? Well, this is sorted by top finish. So if you just wanted to say what player gives me the best chance to win, it would be Jamar Chase or Tyreek Hill. Bijan Robinson actually only has an 8% chance to be the top finisher out of this cohort. The other way that you could look at it is saying by LevX. So Bijan Robinson is the lowest owned of these players at this median. So maybe he's not the top overall finisher, but he does provide the most leverage, whereas Nick Chubb provides the least. Nick Chubb looks like the worst play out of this group, right? He has the lowest median, lowest ceiling, lowest top finish percentage outside of Derrick Henry. Like, being able to sort this based on the appropriate pivots that you can find is really valuable. So the main reason to do this is, say that you were to be playing a small field contest, right? And you build a cash lineup, and then you're looking to pivot off of things so that you can develop leverage for that contest. That's the main reason for this tool. So what we can do is those really high-owned players, let's say it was Jamal Williams, right? So we know that Jamal Williams is going to be the highest owned player on the slate based on ownership projections when I'm recording this. Let's go ahead and simulate appropriate pivots to him. So if we were to build a cash lineup, a very easy way to build a GPP lineup from a cash lineup is just to pivot off of Jamal Williams. So here we can see that Jamal Williams himself projects way down here with his appropriate pivots. He is, I'm pretty sure, the worst play that you could make in this price range, outside of Khalil Herbert. Khalil Herbert is a little bit worse. But based on the ownership, and based on the medians at play here, he's a really, really bad play. The best play, if you wanted to pivot at flex, would be Marquise Brown. He looks like the highest leverage play. His ownership is really low. His median is good. His top finish percentages are really good. So that's how you do it. But say that you're looking to pivot just at running back, right? Well, you can do that. So go down here, go to specific positions, choose running back, and now let's just see the appropriate pivots that we can make against Jamal Williams just at running back. We can run this and we can see we still have a whole bunch of options. Jamal Williams at running back is not quite as bad as he is at flex, but overall we have much better options. Samaje Perine, for the same price, projects a little bit higher and has 1/10 of the ownership. That looks awesome. So this is how you're going to be using this tool. You're just going to be finding pivots to players that you want to get off of in one lineup to either give yourself more leverage or give yourself more volatility. Say that we had Samaje Perine, right? And we wanted to pivot to give ourselves less volatility in our lineup by getting on more ownership. Well, okay, so we can do that. And then we can sort by ownership and say, oh, okay, Jamal Williams is the highest owned player here. I'm going to lower the volatility of my lineup, get off of Samaje Perine, and get on Jamal Williams. So that's how you're going to use the Pivot Finder. Next, Stack Finder. So the Stack Finder is, again, another really cool tool that I developed actually for MLB. And what this actually does, again, you can upload your projections here if you'd like. What this does is we're going to be giving it a team to run, so we can choose, whatever data we want to look at, whatever site we want to look at. We can run stack analysis for a full slate or individual teams, and this one is actually important for this tool, and I'll talk about why in a sec. And then are you viewing specific positions groups or position groups. You can also choose max salary, and then you're choosing what size of stacks you're analyzing, QB1 or QB plus 2. So if we just do a full slate run here, and we run this with QB plus 1, what we see is it is going to give us the best projected lineup based on the ownership. So we'll zoom in here so we can see this. As you can see, we are missing a couple different teams. Specifically, we're missing Miami here, right? And when we looked at the range of outcomes for stacks, Miami projected very, very well. The reason for that is because they project higher than a Minnesota lineup. And Minnesota projects the best for any QB plus 1 stack. Kirk Cousins plus Justin Jefferson is the highest overall median projection combo that you can make, and they project for 18% combined ownership. Anything above 18 ownership now is not going to be used. If you have Theory DFS, which is invaluable coming into NFL season, you'll notice this as trimming logic. And what this is doing is actually trimming out the combos as you are running them. So the other thing that we can do here, we'll zoom back in, is say QB plus 2, right? And then we can run stack analysis. So this is based on all of the slate. This is QB plus 2. And again, we're not going to see much Miami. Miami looks over-owned based on their projections here. The top overall projection that you can get for a QB plus 1 plus 2 is Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And the ownership is 37%. Anything over 37%, not going to be used based on as we are going down projections. This is basically optimizing combos. And then the other thing that you can do here is we can say, okay, but what happens if I want to see Miami stacks? What are the best Miami stacks that I can use? Because I'm not getting them in a full slate run, but I still want to see them. So here you go. You can isolate Miami, and you can say, what are the stacks that are usable based on median projection and ownership? Median projection in regards to ownership. So top overall is Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. No shit. And then as we move down, it looks like we are going to be getting way, way down here, right? Like the top overall projection is 50, is basically 51, and then 42. And then we have a bunch of things here where we are using one of Jalen Waddle or Tyreek Hill, but mostly just Jalen Waddle, right? And then we're not using either one of them for the rest. And the ownership gets a lot lower once you get to there. But it's pretty clear if you want to use a Miami stack, you're probably going to have some negative leverage there because they end up their ownerships are just high. So the main way that you use this, and I like using this to start, or after I have chosen the teams that I'm interested in, you go to the range of outcomes, you choose the stacks that you're interested in, or you go to the betting models, if you just want to focus on the highest overall team total games. And then you choose the appropriate teams that you would like to look at, and then you can enter them in. So let's say that I wanted to look at, specifically, I have leveled this down to Cincinnati, Minnesota, and Miami stacks. And then I want to say QB plus 1. I can run the stacks, and I can see Cincinnati and Miami are both way too over-owned to be really considered as a stack if I am looking at only stacking these three. Like if I'm building my one lineup for the $100 single entry, and I have broken it down and I say, okay, for this contest, I want to use either a Miami stack, Cincinnati stack, or a Minnesota stack. And then I run it. The only lineups that show up here are going to be Minnesota stacks because those are lineups that are correct based on their ownership. If I were to change this to QB plus 2, we would see that it's Cincinnati. We have this Joe Burrow stack that we can use, or we have Minnesota. So Miami is over-owned for something like the $100 single entry, right? It's just not going to show up here. Now, again, all these tools should be used together. If you want to use Miami stack, that's great. You can use Miami stack. It projects very, very well. But you're going to want to then also find leverage using the pivot finder or using the range of outcomes to give yourself some win equity at running back or at tight end or at defense, right? Like you're going to want to use these tools together. So use whatever it is that you want to use to find the teams that you want to stack. Go into the stack finder, put those teams together like I did with Miami, Cincinnati, and Minnesota here, right? Run that and say, I kind of really want to use Miami stack. That's fine. go ahead and parse it back down to Miami here. And then go into the pivot finder and make sure that you get off of Jamal Williams or Kenneth Walker for some appropriate pivots in that range, right? Easy to do. And then again, of course, any questions that you guys have, I'm happy to answer in the Discord. The Discord is free to join. If you just go over to Paydirt DFS and you go into the member tools, you can go to the Discord, and there's a link here. You can just go to the link, and then you can join the Discord. So let's go ahead and go on to the next one, which is the optimizer. So full disclaimer here. I am not trying to build an optimizer that can do all the same things that Fantasy Cruncher or Lineup HQ or SaberSim can do. I, of course, am just a dude. I only have so much time that a dude has in a day. So I don't think that I can build a full-out kick-ass optimizer that can kick the shit out of industry standard stuff. I just don't think that I can, and I'm not going to try. What this optimizer should be used for is cash games or direction in small field and large field stuff, right? So I'll show you what I mean here. So again, you can upload your own projections into this if you'd like. And then you can look at main slate, secondary slate. This will be Thursday through Monday. Again, I just haven't changed those terms. Or user if you uploaded your own stuff. You can choose what site you're looking at. You can choose to run cash, small field, or large field GPP. And then that's going to bring up some other optionality as well, which I'll talk about here in a sec. You can optimize using specific games if you don't want to include specific games in the optimization. You can lock players. You can drop players out of it and X them out. How many lineups do you want to produce, min salary, max salary. So if you just run this based on optimals, it'll just run on optimals, right? And then you can see what the optimal is for your projection set. You can also go down here and see what the exposures that you have are for your optimals that you ran. You can then also go down here and see what the lineup cards look like, right? So this is for every lineup that you created. If this is for cash, so specifically what I want to point out is if you are looking at cash, let's sort this by ownership. So we're going to see that Jamal Williams, Kenneth Walker, and cash games are projected at this ownership, right? If we change this to small field, we can see that their ownership changes. So one important thing here that I have been doing at Paydirt for a while now and that other people are catching up to is using variable ownership. Because ownership is very important when you're doing cash games, right? And when you're doing small field, when you're doing large field. And you need to have that variable ownership. So for everything, for every single tool here, except for the range of outcomes, which utilizes large field ownership, everything else is variable ownership. So that's important. If you choose small field GPP, you also are given this option, where you can use either the pivot optimal or manual. The pivot optimal is a optimizer setting that is utilizes ownership as well. So the pivot optimal for small field and large field GPPs is different. Pivot optimal for small field GPPs will give you the highest owned stack and then surround it with appropriate leverage. The pivot optimal for large field GPPs will give you the highest projected stack for the projections that you gave it, or for Paydirt as well, and then use that stack initially and then fill in with ownership around it. So it's basically like in baseball, the way that this worked was the highest owned stack was used as the base of the pivot optimal, and then it would fill in with leverage around it. And then for large field, it would be the highest leverage stack for large field, and then fill in around it with ownership. It's kind of like an easy button, but I don't want it to be considered an easy button. It gives you better direction based on leverage building, right? So if we were to run this on small field GPP for the pivot optimal, you're going to see that we're going to be building around Joe Burrow here. And then it'll take a second and it'll build things out. And then, again, once it's done building things out, it'll show you what lineups it produced, show you projections, ownership, cost, and then it'll show you what your projected or what your exposures were within these. So you had 100% Jamar Chase, 100% Joe Burrow, and then some mix in of Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins, right? And then if you do the large field GPP and run optimize, again, it's going to build around Joe Burrow, but this time it's going to be a little bit different based on the way that it builds, right? One note, sometimes it's going to use both of the same stack for both because it is both the highest overall owned lineup and also the highest overall projected lineup. Is what it is. So if we want to get away from that, right, and we just want to build, like if you use the pivot optimal, I wouldn't suggest locking certain players because it'll mess some things up. Like you can lock position players, like say that we wanted to lock in Austin Eckler and still do the pivot optimal. Like that's still going to be fine, but you can't lock in like quarterbacks because it's using a quarterback, right? And if you try to lock in too many players at the flex or at wide receiver, it's going to cause issues because what it is doing is automatically locking in a stack. So if you try to mess with certain things that are locked in for that stack, it'll fuck it up. But you can lock in running backs. You can lock in like defense if you wanted to. You can also drop players out, but you cannot drop out players that, like if you try to drop out, for instance, Joe Burrow in this one, then it just won't run. So if you want a little bit of control, we can just go to manual, right? So we can say from our last talk, Minnesota looks like a really good stack. Let's just go a Minnesota 2, and let's just run it. Let's just see what we get. So again, you can see that it's building around Kirk Cousins, and then we're going to be able to see the lineups created in real time. It's giving us Kirk Cousins with Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson for the most part. Another little note here. You're going to notice right now that utility and tight end are flipped. Fucking fight me. I'll fix it here in a little while. It's been a long week. Anyway, if you want more control over this, you can use the manual option, and you can use manual option for both small field and large field. For cash, it just runs based on ownership and projection, so there's no ability to do manual options there. The optimizer, I think, should mostly be used for direction, right? So I think you should be seeing who is used when you're trying to stack different teams. Using the exposure table down there, you can see that certain players are much more valuable based on the projection set than other players, and those should be players that you are focusing on when you're building out. You can export the lineups that you create, right? So I'm not sure if I'm going to have them in upload format or just the players themselves. Upload format gets a little bit sticky when you don't have an automatic API hook to DraftKings, right? But again, this should be used more for direction and for cash games and for building small sets of portfolios. I don't necessarily think that this is the best optimizer on the market for a full MME product, right? Like, I think there are just people who do it better. I'm a man that is honest with myself, okay? I'm just a dude. So let's go ahead and move on from the optimizer and get into the Showdown RO on optimizer. So Showdown, very important. It's something that I think is super valuable when it comes to projections out and for ROI. Again, you can upload your own projections here. One sec. Okay. So you can upload your projections here. And then you can come over here and you can actually create a range of outcomes for Showdown, right? So if you're using Paydirt, you can just select Paydirt, and then you can run to range of outcomes. It's going to give this little int64 table at first, and then it'll produce a range of outcomes for Showdown, right? You can also, if you uploaded something here, go ahead and upload it using user. And then we have the optimizer, which again, a lot of these are kind of the same options that we had for the main slate optimizer, but there's a very important other option here. Allow over-owned lineups. Again, if you have Theory DFS, this is trimming functionality, right? So what we're going to do here is if we say yes, let's just run cash game optimals, right? And let's just build these out. So here are the top 20 overall cash game optimals, right? As you can see, like some of these lineups look pretty overowned. 287% ownership, 285. So if we wanted to say that we only want lineups to be produced that have appropriate projection in regards to their ownership, we can say that we do not want to allow overowned lineups. And what that's going to do is now we can see that we didn't get 20 lineups out of it, but we did get lineups that drop down in ownership as they drop down in projection. And you can see that the overall top projected lineup, like this one, is going to be really, really popular. If we exit out of that full screen view and we go down to this player card, look at the ownerships that we're dealing with here for this top overall one, right? Like, we have a 3% owned captain, Sky Moore, but then we just, like, this lineup's going to be duped like fucking a million times. So instead, let's take a look and say, all right, well, what about this one? This one projects for about 1 point less than the optimal, but has 140% less ownership. So let's go down to that one. That one's the 4th lineup produced. So this one has Patrick Mahomes captain, but ends up with considerably less ownership surrounding him, right? It's a KC 2-step with Patrick Mahomes and Sky Moore, and then surrounding it with Detroit without Amon-Ra St. Brown. So we end up with a lot less ownership, but the projection seems the same. Just about. This is a really important concept in Showdown, especially when using Showdown Optimizer. You should not just play the fucking optimal in large field GPPs. You can do it in cash games. You can even get away with it in really small fields if you want to. But for the most part, you should not be playing the optimal in Showdown. Shit's gonna be duped, bro. Like, it's just gonna be duped. It's gonna be duped fucking a lot. You should not be playing the optimal in Showdown. Instead, what you should be doing is doing something like this, where you do not allow overowned lineups, and then going down the line and saying, what lineup looks like it has plenty of upside while also maintaining edge and win equity. Something like this looks like it does. And then you can continue going down, right? Like, this one is within 3 points and drops down 150% ownership, right? So once you get into kind of this range here, these lineups look really good. These 4 lineups right here. And then you're starting to drop down a little bit farther. But please God, do not play the optimal in large field GPPs. You're just burning money. It's not worthwhile doing. So that's Showdown Optimizer and ROO. We only have a couple things left to look at here. Oh, we only have one thing left to look at. Okay, cool. So this is the game betting model and the prop betting model. So the game betting model, first one that you're going to see, is just going to be the Paydirt win percentages against the Vegas win percentages and the difference in win percentage, as well as the spread and the spread diff. So this model has been really strong over the last couple of years. 70+% win rate last year, and hits on a lot of dogs usually. So what we can see is, especially if we go to American, right? So here you can see the American odds, right? If we sort this by line diff, what we can see is that Houston looks like Vegas gives them a 390, like plus 390. Paydirt has them at plus 255. So there's a lot of edge on Houston, right? If we sort this the other way, again, we see that Baltimore is 390. They should be 255 based on the Paydirt model. We can see this again in the spread. If we sort by spread diff here, the team that has the largest spread diff, Vegas has Jacksonville as a 5-point favorite. Paydirt has Indianapolis as a 2-point, or as Jacksonville as a 2-point underdog, right? So some really cool things to see here. If you wanted to hit underdogs only from this model, I think that's fine. But overall, if you also just wanted to sort by the win line, right, and see what teams should be considered the best plays overall, Washington, Arizona, Kansas City, whatever, do your thing. We can also see for prop betting, we can see all of the QB baselines here, including rush attempts, dropbacks, rush yards, touchdowns for rushing, pass yards, all that kind of stuff. We can see also the stats for running back, wide receiver, tight end. And then we can see player pop simulations. So this is going to be the one that people are probably most interested in. And this one is going to be, you can select a player. I'm pretty sure that the last time I saw Mahomes, it was 285.5. And then we can actually simulate out, it's negative 114. We can actually simulate out how often Patrick Mahomes goes over his prop. So we can see that it's running. Again, a little running guy up there. And then when it's done, what it's going to do is it's going to pop out the distribution of how often he ends up at that outcome. So here's the little prop line. That's where the prop is. And then here's all of his outcomes, right? So it'll tell you the 10th percentile outcome for Patrick Mahomes is 206 passing yards. The median, or the mean, is 305. And the 90th percentile is 405 yards. The implied odds is 53%. It beats the prop 60% of the time. And the model says no bet. Note that the model is trained to be conservative in these kinds of things. So it's important to know that when you're breaking these down. If you wanted to bet this, technically you could, because it does beat the prop 7% of the time. But it wants to find better edge than that. So you can do that for a whole bunch of different things here. You can do it for passing yards, passing TDs, basically anything that you can see over in these projections. All you have to do is then type in what the prop is offered, what the prop is that's offered, and then what the line is, and you can select over or under as well. And then finally, the last thing, and this is the thing that people will use the most because it's the easiest thing to use, but whatever, is going to be the stat-specific simulations. So for all of, let's do rushing yards. And this is based on the DraftKings Sportsbook. If we simulate out rushing yards, it'll tell you where the edge is lying for anything that you can find on DraftKings Sportsbook. And this will be updated throughout the week as well. It'll tell you what the prop is, what the mean outcome for the player is, the implied over, the over percentage based on the simulations, the implied under, and the under percentage based on the simulations, and then tell you what the bet is and how much edge you have on that bet, right? You're going to see a lot of no bets, but it'll just give you the things that are the best. So that's the full suite. That's everything. I think for $40 a month or $200 for the full year, you're not going to find anything in the industry that's better than this whole suite put together. It offers you just as much edge as you're going to find anywhere else. I'm really happy about it. I'm really excited for this season. I think that this is the most prepared that I have been coming into an NFL season, and I'm really excited to go just balls to the wall for it. So if you're not already a Paydirt subscriber, you should come join the community. Like I said, the price is very, very fair. If you get the $40 all access pass, then you can get every single sport offered on the site. If you get the $35 just NFL one, then you get access to all these tools that we just went through. If you're not in the Discord, come join the Discord. That one is free to join. You don't even have to make an account on the site. You can just fucking join the Discord if you want. Again, my name's James Cool. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I am Paydirt_DFS on Twitter, or you can find me most of the day in the Discord. And yeah, thank you guys for tuning in, and let's crush out this NFL season.